fairies are dangerous. History, hashtag fairy court, hashtag cottagecore. So carrying on reviewing this book. So I was talking about changelings. Another interesting belief is the Russian, popular in Russia, is the Russian Arestun. I can't pronounce these words. Arestun, which literally means living vampire. And these vampires could actually transform themselves and acquire another person's face, so they could look exactly the same on surface as the person. They could look exactly the same on surface as the person was before. Yet they're not the same, and this is often and this belief in living vampires is often brought about through someone having a mental illness. Which is another sort of way of kind of like rationalising a change. So we have the changeling belief, which is a way of rationalising a change in someone's child. We also have a living vampire belief, which is like a way in which you can rationalise the change in someone's behaviour. And then it also looks at other fairies and myths. For example, Morgan Le Fay, and Fay obviously meaning fairy. He was a consort of King Arthur and was a shapeshifter who could fly. Morgan literally means an Irish water spirit. And then it discusses Avalon, the Isle of Apples, and that's where Morgan cares for the wounded Arthur. Again, it looks, the Arthur legends, and there's one theory about King Arthur, is that Arthur is not dead and that he might one day return. His idea that Arthur was taken by the fairies to the Welsh otherworld. And the book also looks at various poems. For example, 1613 Britannia Pastorals by William Brown, which looks at is a sort of myth of national origin myth, the myth of Albion, which is a mythical British ruler born from a coupling between Neptune and a mortal woman. And during Albion's rule, the fairies stole one of his children, who was also called Albion, who falls for a fairy girl, Kenna. Then Albion dies in a battle and is transformed into a flower, the snowdrop. It's an interesting myth there, or legend. And Albion stands for Britain or England, which is kind of like a kind of archaic word for Britain or England, Albion. It covers other poets as well, such as William Blake, Queen Mab by Shelley. We've also got Keats, La Belle Dame sans Merci. Looks at William Allingham, who's the husband of Helen Allingham, who we talked about in one of my other videos. William Allingham was her husband, and he was a poet. He wrote the poem Two Fairies in a Garden. And it also looks at Christina Rossetti's Goblin Mask Kit of 1862, where two sisters, Lizzie and Laura, are tempted by the goblin's forbidden fruit. Laura gives in and sort of pines away, and Lizzie has to then seek a cure from the goblin men. It's an interesting poem, which I think is available online actually. It's called Goblin Market, it's very good. And it also looks very interestingly at the so-called Victorian paradox around fairies, because the Victorians were absolutely obsessed with fairies, and this is where a lot of the transformation of fairies into sort of whimsical, more feminine, little cute creatures first came into being, really, as the Victorians transformed fairies and focused more on their kind of pretty features as opposed to their more dangerous side. But there are various questions as to why, if you look at Victorian paintings, for example, that painting there, for example, Many Victorian paintings are very erotic and very almost like soft porn, actually. And it's called the Victorian paradox, because the Victorians were renowned for being very repressed and prim, you know. But at the same time, they were deeply erotic, and although they cannot talk about naked female body because that was considered to be incredibly taboo, they could paint it. So painting was a way in which the Victorians could express the erotic side in a sort of safe way that got behind the censors, as it were. So it looks at like various paintings mainly from the Victorian period, and also many pre-Raphaelites. I love the pre-Raphaelites, but quite a few of pre-Raphaelites depicted fairies. And it also moves on then to look at Peter Pan, moving forward towards the Edwardian period. J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, and Peter Pan is really does represent the essence of a fairy in a sense, because he exhibits selfish independence, irresponsibility, which is basically the fairy id, that kind of the animal sort of side, the sort of untamed kind of pure ego, which fairies are sort of said to embody, and it's and to be a bit of a Peter Pan is to not grow up really. And to be a bit of Peter Pan, this has been quite a few people have been said to be like that. For example, the deceased American poet Walt Whitman was said to be a bit like Peter Pan, and also someone called Julius Gordon, the Dean of Pretoria, who died suddenly in 1932. He was incredibly eccentric. He lived young and he died young, and he was said to be a bit of Peter Pan as well. Peter was interestingly considered to be androgynous, and also what's very interesting is that all the leads in the Peter Pan play were actually female until 1982, which is also quite interesting. In 1933, Dr. Maurice Newfield coined the Peter Pan complex, which basically is like people who don't grow up, so like grown-up children, who are said to have like a Peter Pan complex. And then the book looks at the Disneyfication of fairies, so how, the Victorians started this trend really of kind of sanitising fairies, because it really took off with Walt Disney, and Disneyfication is actually a word that actually has a mention in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it's defined as being the simplification, sanitisation, or romanticisation of a place or concept, and which typical of Disney films really. So that's where we get a kind of more modern idea of fairies from. It's from Disney films, but it's so far removed from the original conception of fairies in folk mythology. So that's really that's kind of really what the book covers. As I say, it starts most of the book kind of looks at folk beliefs and draws upon folk beliefs, a lot of it from Irish folklore, and then the next part of the book then looks at paintings in art and culture and literature, and moves us right forward to the present and the Disneyfication. So it's quite a voyage really, looking at the transformation of fairies from that sort of image to a fairy with wings, which is more like a sort of Victorian construct that then was really that Disney then just went and ran with really. I thought it was quite an interesting book. I did feel it maybe waffled a little bit, at least at the start, when it kind of maybe went on a bit too much. I mean, if you're really into hearing about kind of, I don't know, folk mythology, that sort of thing, this is a book for you. But I would have been more interested if it had talked a bit more about kind of fairies in art, because I find that more interesting, like fairies in art or fairies in literature. But I did find it quite interesting though, and it did open my eyes to the way in which, you know, fairies have been transformed throughout history and in the sort of public imagination. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed my review, and thank you for watching.